Mr. President, welcome to the programme.
Thank you very much.
Can I ask you first a very worrying development, the escalation from Russia sending missiles few kilometres from the Polish border. Poland is a NATO country, as you're well aware. Does that worry you?
That does worry me. That does worry all of us. And it's not only a question about these few missiles, but overall picture is in a way frightening.
Do you think, given what you know about Putin himself, you've met him many times over the last 10 years, you've spoken to him many times around this crisis, do you think he would challenge the call and the consistent warning by NATO that not 1 square inch, if so much as 1 square inch of NATO territory is attacked by Russia, all of NATO will respond? Do you think Putin believes that?
I guess he believes. He hasn't done that. Not yet. And I do believe that he understands the huge risk he's going to take if he does it.
You don't think he's going to breach that line?
No.
Okay. What do you think at this point, having spoken to President Putin and President Zelensky, what do you think a peace or a ceasefire or an end to this looks like?
They are negotiating. Fourth round is ongoing at the moment, and what we heard earlier on is a slight positive comment on both sides. But what the result could be, maybe we are far away from that, even though we have some positive signals. And well, Putin has his list, we all know it, but it seems that changing the government of Ukraine is not anymore at the list. When I asked him, he said that it has never been there, but nevertheless, that was the understanding so far.
So when everybody thought that he was going to march on Kiev and extract the government and enact regime change and put a puppet in, you think that's off the table now?
Well, he was very clear when I said that, have you given up that demand? He said that I have never demanded it.
Okay. Okay, so let's go through the list of demands. Crimea.
Yeah.
He wants it still.
He wants recognition that it's part of Russia.
Eastern Ukraine, Donbass.
Donbass, a wider Donbass than that one which is now under command of separatists.
He wants an even bigger Donbass.
Yes, it's Donbass by the map, how is it there, not just Donbass as it now is in hands of separatists.
Neutrality.
Yes, and we have heard some comments also from President Zelensky that, well, something could be discussed on that issue.
Because he did say earlier last week that he cooled off, I think those were his
something
words.
Like that, something like that.
Demilitarization of Ukraine.
Well, actually, Putin said that it's ongoing, and it is. With the war, I mean.
In other words, de facto, by attacking the Ukraine and the military.
That seems that that's the way Russians think.
You have spoken to him many times, including just a couple of days ago. So too have presidents and chancellors, Macron, Scholz, etc., the Israeli Prime Minister as well. They described their calls with Putin as finding a very determined Putin.
Actually, already in December, I had a call with him, and I described it later that he sounded very decided. And that continues also during my discussions.
Decided?
Decisive,
very
decisive, yes, with his list of demands. But there was one element which I noticed both Scholz and Macron and Putin has said after their calls that we continue. And for the first time he ended my discussion by saying that I'm available all the time. So can we read something from this? He wants to continue discussions. It might be tactical, but it might be also that he feels a real need to have contacts and discussions.
You know, people have tried to figure out, what does he want? Is it just those things we just talked about? Is it all of Ukraine? Does he hate Ukraine? Does he want to punish Ukraine? You said in an interview, at first I thought that Ukraine is just the bait for the Kremlin, and the catch is on the general demands towards the US and NATO. But maybe in the end, Russia also wants to eat the bait.
Yeah. And now it looks more and more as an Ukrainian issue. He hasn't been talking about those demands towards NATO or USA lately. But one thing is very clear to me, that he wants to talk straight to Washington, because it promotes him.
And yet he's not.
Well, maybe in a nearby future, hope so.
Fiona Hill, the Russia expert in
Yeah.
the National Security Advisory for several presidents, and yourself, have described this sense of punitive bitterness that Putin has ever since, I guess, the Color Revolution, since the, you know, the election of the first democratic president in 2004, and on and on and on. Is that what you feel? That he has this need to, I don't know,
He's
punish?
very bitter, and he, well, crows hate inside.
For Ukraine?
Yes, because somehow he, well, starts with Mother Russia and Ukraine being a part of that. It's somehow he has made a mission for himself about the Mother Russia. It's also excuse.
You know, I could ask you, and I will ask you, about the assault on civilians. I mean, it is the most terrible thing for the world to witness.
Yeah.
They blatantly deny it, despite the images. They blatantly deny it. And yet, it's happening, and we can all see it.
Yeah.
You warned him about it, right? You said that, you know, these civilian deaths, the atrocities that are being committed in full view of the whole world, are reverberating very negatively against Russia. What did he say to that?
Well, actually, he started by blaming Ukrainians, what they have done in Donbass. And I answered that, well, but you are having a warfare in Ukraine. People in Kiev, Mariupol, Kharkov, they are being killed, and they have nothing to do with your Donbass. But he really didn't answer that.
What does it do to your public opinion and to public opinion around the world? People have been galvanized all over
Yes.
the world. I mean, Russia is being cancelled.
Yeah.
And Ukraine has become the rallying cry for so many people, certainly in the West. What pressures does that put on your government? Because, you know, there are a lot of people who say, don't you think you should do a little bit more for the Ukrainian military?
Yes, we find that spirit all over in Europe and in the States too, I believe, also in Finland. And people are a bit confused why the West can't do anything else or
won't
more. And then the risk of escalation is not that clearly in their mind. If you see civilians being bombed, you don't think about escalation first, you think about their sufferers, that they are suffering. And
there's a sense of do something, right?
Yes.
That they want you all to do something to stop it.
Very many voices can be heard, and it is a very difficult. I sometimes think about cups. Here we have people being killed all the time, and here risk of escalation. Which is weighing more?
So
here we are.
So when you ask him, Mr. President, you've said all sorts of things about putting your deterrent forces on combat alert. You've said that anybody who dares to interfere with your project will face consequences the like of which we've never seen in history.
Yes.
I mean, that is a nuclear threat, isn't it?
It is. It is something like that. That reminds me of Dr. Kissinger. He has once said that whenever peace is under discussion with the international actors, they are on the mercy of the most ruthless.
And in this case?
Seems to be the case.
Putin is the most ruthless.
Yes.
Do you believe...
By indicating that there will be a huge mess.
Well, it's more than a mess. It's
more than a
existential
mess.
disaster.
Disaster.
Do you believe, and have you asked him, whether he would take that ultimate escalatory step?
He only repeated that terrible things will happen.
So you directly asked him?
Yes, I told him that, don't you see that the pressure from ordinary people grows all the time? It's not only anymore that the Russian reputation is gone, but now they are even more worried what happens with those people being killed. And don't you see that? Well, then he said that if NATO countries take action, so terrible things will happen.
Are you scared?
No, I'm not scared, and Finns are not scared, but surely we are fully awake.
Fully awake?
Yep.
You have known Putin, as I said, for at least 10 years, right?
10 years, yes.
10 years. You've played ice hockey with him, there are plenty of pictures. Yeah. If you had to describe him, he plays ice hockey, that's pretty, combative. He plays judo,
yes.
That's pretty combative. How do you describe him?
And the history of KGB officer means that you're all the time in battlefield.
You're always in the battlefield?
Yeah, he's a fighter. That is what I told to President Trump also when he, before he met Putin in Helsinki. But on the other hand, there's another element which is linked to Mother Russia. You know that Putin has links to Orthodoxy Church, very close. If you count these two together, a fighter and then this Mother Russia thinking that, I would say that he might respect and love Mother Russia even more than his own mother. And maybe it's an excuse, just a justification for what he does.
Do you think he's cornered? Do you think something can get his back off the wall?
Very difficult to estimate, very difficult. He is very decisive at the moment.
Determined?
Determined.
Some have said they detect that he feels this is the moment to do this.
That might be, maybe the calculation was, well, Angela Merkel leaving in United States, a lot of domestic political discussion, and maybe even Afghanistan gave him some kind of signal that it would be the moment. And on the other hand, we have to understand that if you look the situation from Kremlin,
Kremlin,
yes, they undoubtedly saw that Ukraine is economically growing, getting stronger year after year. So maybe even that was seen and emphasized that the momentum is now.
This is the Foreign Ministry spokeswoman, Zakharova, in Moscow. It's obvious that if Finland and Sweden join NATO, which is first of all a military organization, it will entail serious military political consequences, which would require retaliatory steps by the Russian Federation.
That's what we have heard many times, actually. Putin said it a couple of years ago to a Finnish journalist asking that. He said then that, well, so far we have seen, looking over the border, a Finnish friendly soldier. If you join NATO, we see an enemy. So that's their position, and they don't hide it. It's good that we know, but we decide.
President Niinistö, thank you so much indeed for joining me.